Well, hello, everybody. Oh, here's Natasha. Everybody get the PDF of the sheet I made today? I just thought as I was reading, again, Uncle Screwtape's letters to dear nephew Wormwood are fairly short. So I thought rather than doing detailed notes, I might just kind of do what I saw as kind of the central thing in that chapter as a way to kind of launch us into conversation. If you didn't read the preface, it's worth reading. It's cute. Maybe I'll just read it for us. I have no intention of explaining how the correspondence which I now offer to the public fell into my hands. There are two equal and opposite errors into which our race can fall about the devils. One is to disbelieve in their existence. The other is to believe and to feel an excessive and unhealthy interest in them. They themselves are equally pleased by both errors and hail a materialist or a magician with the same delight. The sort of script which is used in this book can be very easily obtained by anyone who has once learned the knack. But ill-disposed or excitable people who might make a bad use of it shall not learn it from me. Readers are advised to remember that the devil is a liar. Not everything that Screwtape says should be assumed to be true, even from his own angle. I have made no attempt to identify any of the human beings mentioned in these letters, but I think it very unlikely that the portraits, say, of Father Spike or the patient's mother are wholly just. There is wishful thinking in hell as well as on earth. In conclusion, I ought to add that no effort has been made to clear up the chronology of the letters. Number 17 appears to have been composed before rationing became serious, but in general, the diabolical method of dating seems to bear no relation to terrestrial time, and I have not attempted to reproduce it. The history of the European war, except insofar as it happens now and then to impinge upon the spiritual condition of one human being, was obviously of no interest to Screwtape. C.S. Lewis, Magdalen College, July 5th, 1941. That kind of locates us. The devil is a liar. And notice that things move in pairs, and we'll see that throughout. Notice the caution to disbelieve in Satan as his kingdom altogether, or to have too much of an interest. So there's ditches that we're walking through as we engage in these letters. So chapter 1, I saw as don't argue, fuddle. And that is Uncle Screwtape's advice to his junior devil nephew, Wormwood. So what did you notice in chapter 1 that stood out to you or that you want to comment on?
It's been a while since I wrote my notes, and for the whole chapter, I only wrote one line, and it says, "Can't hear what the Holy Spirit says to us. He's keeping his eyes on the everyday normal things."
Okay, so yes, so this comes out of a little narrative Uncle Screwtape tells his nephew about a time where his patient was in the library and suddenly he starts to think. And Screwtape says, I see my work of 20 years beginning to totter, but I don't lose my head and I don't move into argument. Instead, I kind of assume what it is that the enemy is saying, because of course I don't have access to that. So I figure out he must be saying this. And so I throw out this line. Yes, this is serious, much too serious to tackle on an empty stomach. Better to come back to this after lunch fresh. And with that, the patient cheers up, stands up, goes outside. He sees a passing bus. He sees a newspaper boy hailing the day's news. And suddenly that is real life. And the patient is filled with the sense of the real life, and the weird ideas that might come to you when you're locked up in a library, confined to books, don't really count. Those aren't real, really. So yes, the enemy doesn't have to launch some great attack of argument against our thinking. In fact, says Uncle Screwtape, that will put us on the enemy's grounds. Again, because God is order, Satan is chaos. So argument is to move into God's camp. Rather, distraction is, or fuddlement is the key for the enemy there. Other thoughts on chapter 1?
I like that line. If he must dabble in science, keep him on economics and sociology. Don't let him get away from that invaluable real life.
Right, yes. Economics, I mean, we're all handling money all the time, right? So there's a certain materialism there. But the big ideas, science initially, theology was the queen of the sciences. And so science initially was about the investigation of God's good world. And one could do science because it was founded on the idea that because God created all things, it has logical coherence. What we study, and I mean, the reason why we sit down without thinking about the chair collapsing underneath us is because we make the assumption that it will support us. Why do we do that? Well, because we live in a world that seems to have consistency in laws. When we sit on things, they don't just collapse. I mean, sometimes they do collapse, but those are the exceptions, and those exceptions prove the rule. The reason why we're so shocked, injured, upset by a chair collapsing under us is because they're supposed to remain solid. Right? So it proves the rule. It's a good observation. Also notice that human beings have a dozen incompatible philosophies dancing about their head together at any given time. True. And then also the language of doctrines, right? On the first page. Human beings don't think about doctrine, and doctrine means teaching, right? So we don't think about those primarily as true or false. Rather, Satan has moved the conversation from true or false into academic, practical, outworn, contemporary, conventional, ruthless. Jargon, not argument, is your best ally in keeping him from the church. So this is again harks back to mere Christianity and some of the things that Lewis has said there. You see any parallels in any of the chronicles that we've read of Narnia?
I don't know what the right word is, but kind of the parallel. But I thought when you talk about God of order, I also thought of like the chaos
Right.
of spring coming.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
witch in the wardrobe.
Yes. Yeah. An order that is chaotic to the disorder.
Yes.
Yes.
The bringing of the new order is the chaos, but it's bringing order.
Yes. Aslan is an anarchist to the present government.
Yes.
Yeah. If you really want to look at a picture of that very idea, G.K. Chesterton wrote a book called The Man Who Was Thursday. It's an interesting read, a lot of fun. And it's a similar conversation. And Chesterton himself was British and an apologist for the Christian faith. He was Catholic, but man, he had a good head on him. You've got mail. Do remember, you are there to fuddle him. From the way some of you young fiends talk, anyone would suppose it was our job to teach. It's kind of fun because Lewis is a teacher, of course. And he's writing this Magdalen College, Cambridge. So that's kind of fun. But it's also an alert, right? Clear thinking and focusing on clear thinking can be an antidote to the schemes of the devil, right? So our battle's not against flesh and blood, but against the schemes, against the principalities and the powers. And so Lewis is letting us know one of the tools in our arsenal is clear, rational thinking.
It brings to mind, I had a friend growing up in a church in Nova Scotia. His dad was our pastor, and he went on to school. And then a few years later, I ran into him and he was working on his master's, and then eventually I think he got his PhD, but in philosophy. And he had moved away from the faith.
Right.
And I remember him being in Calgary working on the latter part of his master's before he went back to do his PhD, and sitting with him at lunch, and he was so confusing. Like he was so lost in his own thoughts. It was like chaos.
Yes, yes,
Like
yes.
there was no reason or logic and I just thought, man, you are you're just lost. And he has remained lost. And his parents are on their knees, I'm sure, often. But I just think, man, you can just get so lost in the woods of your own thoughts, thinking that you are very smart.
Yes.
And
Yes.
give an answer for absolutely everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, Paul's very clear in places like Corinthians that the wisdom of God is the foolishness to the world. And it is stood on its head quite a bit. So yeah, that's sad though. Right? Well, we got 17 chapters, so we don't want to dwell too long on chapter 1. Chapter 2, I've said, let his church disappoint his idea of Christianity. What did you think of chapter 2? First of all, we should start out by saying things are not going well for Wormwood. First, his patient was thinking about Christianity. Now he has become a Christian. So this is not good. And note also that there are punishments for the demons. And of course, they wouldn't actually want to avoid those punishments.
Oh, sure.
Thought that was interesting that right away, all the habits of the patient, both mental and bodily, are still in our favor. So he's in the enemy's camp,
Yes.
but all the habits, both mental and bodily, are still in our favor.
Right. And so Screwtape has wisdom, right? We don't need to panic. This is not good. You know, it's Wormwood's job to keep the patient away from becoming a Christian, right? To guarantee his soul to the devil. However, these things do happen, but we don't need to panic here. Others have had brief movements through this camp and are now with us down below. And yeah, things are still in the favor of the demons, even in these first days. And then he names as an ally, chief ally, is the church itself. Now, he describes the church in two different ways. he does a clarification. What are those two different ways that he describes the church?
Well, the first thing he talks about is he says, I'm not talking about the church as it goes through time, as it, I forget exactly how it's phrased, but
Yeah,
it's like, it's not just now, today, or that building. It's this huge, endless, eternal things.
yes. I do not mean the church as we see her spread out through all time and space and rooted in eternity, terrible as an army with banners.
That's it.
Mhm.
And that really struck me. I was like, yeah, but I never thought about it that way.
What's helpful about thinking about it that way? Why is that of benefit to us?
Well, I get it's funny how you start at self-analyzing yourself. But my first reaction is, well, that's something very powerful to be allied with. So that's attractive to me anyway.
Yes, yes. And I think scripturally, that's very true. So think of the book of Hebrews. We are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. We tend to think in very human terms, right? Somebody dies, they're gone. They are separated from us. But no, says scripture, we are surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses, right? God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's the God of the living, not of the dead, right? That's what Jesus says to the Sadducees in argument for the resurrection. God is the God of the living. So while they are departed from us, they are not separated from us. We continue to be one body. That's why I'm pointing at the Apostle Creed's banner here. We believe in the communion of the saints. We don't commune with the dead, we commune with the living, right? That's why in the Catholic Church and other churches, they can, what we call as pray to the saints. I think that they would clarify and say pray with the saints. So when they ask Mary or Joseph or Saint whoever to pray on their behalf, they're not praying to that person, they're praying with that person. So again, we're surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses. And then think of the book of Revelation. There's a correspondence to the reality of the congregation, right? To the church in Laodicea, write this. There is an angel of that church. There is a heavenly connection, which kind of roots into what Paul says in Ephesians. We are seated in the heavenly places with Christ. Our lives are hidden in Christ Jesus with him. And so there's very much this connection. Ours is both a material and an eternal reality, which is what Lewis is trying to bring out here, right? So yes, it's not that there's the church back then and the church over here and the church in the Middle Ages and then our church. No, there's one church, universal, right? Again, Apostles' Creed. And I believe in the Holy Catholic Church, small c Catholic, not large c Catholic, meaning universal, sharing the same creed. That's our identity. It stretches out across time and space. And we are a part of that. We are one organism with Adam, Eve, Abraham, Sarah, David, Nathan, you name it. They're there, right? We are part of that body. And that is a very important way for us to see ourselves, and maybe becomes an important lens to see the other way of looking at church. And what is that?
Neighbors.
Neighbors, right. And what is it about the neighbors that's so problematic?
The actual faces in the pews,
Mhm.
I think some of those pieces, like the ones they didn't want to look at or didn't want to see and then tried to avoid.
Yeah,
The pettiness of neighbors, the little book
yeah,
that he doesn't understand, the lyrics he doesn't understand.
right. So even it's not just the people, it's also the structural pieces that are there as well, right? This one shiny little book containing a liturgy, and neither of them understands. It's shabby, containing corrupt texts of religious lyrics and bad and very small print. And
Mhm.
so there's the actual tangible thing as well. And so I think Lewis, not Screwtape, wants to tell us if we can hold these two visions together, we're okay, right? That's why we have two eyes. Think of that revelation. There's both the earthly and the heavenly that is seen, right, at the same time. So we're always bifocal. We're on the present and we're also on eternity. And keeping both in mind are necessary. It's really interesting to me is Lewis is writing in England during the war. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who is a German theologian, writes a very similar thing in his book, Life Together. And that's kind of the little book that he wrote for life in his seminary, and then how to do Christian life in the family as well. And one of the things that he talks about there, which is so key, is he says we need to be careful of the ideal community. The ideal community that every Christian carries in their own mind will kill actual Christian community, because the actual Christian community can never live up to the ideal, right? And so Bonhoeffer says, don't even pray about that. God has not gifted you with this particular community in order for you to be the accuser of the brethren, to point out where they're doing it wrong and what's wrong with them. But rather, as long as we have this ideal, we kill community. And so the biggest gift that God gives us is that he kills our ideal of Christian community with the real community, because it is the real community that is God's gift to us. So I think there's a parallel kind of stream of consciousness here between these two writers at approximately the same time, from different language and countries. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer was actually working against Hitler and Nazi Germany. He was part of the Confessing Church, and he even went so far as to be a spy involved in a plot to assassinate Hitler. So he's certainly not pro-Hitler. And he was not pro that type of German. And so, yeah, we are confronted with the very real people in the pews around us. And they are odd. They can be odd. But again, like Bonhoeffer, there's this idea of the ideal, right? So there's a spiritual picture in the person's head that the real people don't line up with. And that becomes an advantage for Satan. And so again, clear thinking becomes part of the solution for that, right? Don't let it come to the surface what he expected them to look like. You know, everything's now hazy in the mind. And so, you know, you want to keep that haziness. So clear thinking, says Lewis once again, is part of the way that we seek to address this. The second thing is the anticlimax that comes with becoming a new Christian. Again, really important. And Lewis would write this. So on my shelf, I have a collection of his letters and writings to people. And often new Christians will write to him who came to faith based on his writings. And so one of the biggest refrains in his advice is, don't be led by your emotions. Again, because of this sense of anticlimax. And so he uses this couple of illustrations. And he says, you know, in every human endeavor, there's this anticlimactic moment, right? When we go from hearing the stories from the Odyssey in the nursery to actually having to learn Greek. Now, the advantage of learning Greek is then you can read the stories of the Odyssey on your own in their original language and appreciate them at a deeper level, but it takes a lot more work, right? And that's the anticlimax. Marriage, right? That those first fueled days of passion. I'm in love with this person. Everything's easy. We get along. It's just wonderful. I mean, you can almost hear the bird song. And then there's the getting married and actually learning to live together, of making a home, of raising a family.
Sharing a dresser.
Sharing a dresser. Oh, we've hit a nerve. Too soon.
20 years later,
Yeah,
too soon.
too soon. Yeah, way too soon. And notice again, an echo from Mere Christianity, right? He wants free lovers. He doesn't want servants. He wants sons. And so again, Lewis is talking about this process that we are a part of. We are being made sons and daughters, if we're going to update his language, sharing in the life of Christ.
It was interesting to me, like he talks about his prayer and his it's not true humility and it's parody prayer,
Yeah,
right prayers and stuff. But I guess maybe I have the idea, or I think we have to talk about like correct or wrong theology or correct and wrong beliefs as being the primary danger,
right.
or the primary marker of being in danger, not in danger, is I don't want that person to believe the wrong thing.
Yeah.
But he's I think suggesting that, well, believe all the right things as long as it just doesn't really change you.
Mhm.
As long as it doesn't make it down a layer or
Right. Yeah.
really make it to your heart, then
Yeah.
believe all the right things. That's perfect.
Right.
We're still fine.
Yeah, if we can keep that, he says it in a later chapter, if we can keep those things out in the fantasy concentric circle furthest away from us rather than in the will, then Satan's got us, right? It's virtue keeps on being pushed out from us, and criticalness is internal to us. That's the aim of Satan. And so again, what Lewis is saying, yeah, we need to bring those things into the will. If this doesn't communicate into real action, then it's problematic. Yeah. All right. Chapter 3, destroy his Christianity by his annoying relationship with his mother. I should say from a biographical standpoint, Lewis lost his mother early in life. His troublesome relationship was with his father more than his mother. So this is not some sort of Freudian working things out. Although he might have somebody or some situations in mind. I wouldn't think that things are wholly fictitious. So what's the advice here? And I actually see, Ben, kind of what you were saying kind of starts us off, right? The enemy will be working from the center outwards, gradually bringing more and more of the patient's conduct under the new standard, and may reach his behavior to the old lady at any moment. So another adage about the devil is he does not need to have us run in the opposite direction from God. He just needs us to start out an inch off center. Because that will gradually lead us right away from God.
It kind of keeps it in the head level, away from the heart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Lewis uses some older language. We were talking about this in our Christian education. No, we're in Christian education, our leadership group on Saturday. Duty used to be a category, right? You could just appeal to duty. It's your duty to do this. Doesn't work anymore, but Lewis is of a day when duty was a part of the language, a part of the code, a part of living well, right? So to keep a person off their mind off their duty by continuing to be introspective, to look at their own self, at the neglect of the obvious, right? So rather than attending to what you're supposed to be attending to, you are attending to something else. And because it seems so spiritual to be looking at yourself and at your own conversion and turning that over, you don't realize what danger you are in. So that there's this risk of practicing self-examination without discovering any facts about yourself. But what other people, and I said it in my sermon on Sunday, right? People outside of me have access to parts of me that I don't have access to myself. Then, yes, we have prayers. Again, we want our prayers to be very spiritual. Always on the state of her soul and never on her rheumatism.
Yeah, I don't know, that part made me feel like there's been times in life where people spiritualize things rather than
Right.
just naming
Right.
what's going on
Yes.
and dealing with it and just like
Yes.
sprinkling the spiritual language around it.
Yeah.
And you just feel unheard and unseen.
Yes. Yes. And
Yeah.
again, there seems to be this dynamic of fantasy and actuality, idealism, right? So there's this idealized version of his mother that he prays for while being annoyed by and annoying to his very real present mother. And so he can be attentive spiritually to his fantasy while ignoring, maybe even intentionally hurting the real person. So the imagined mother and the real mother. I think that's important to think about in our own prayer lives, especially for the people who might annoy us.
It makes me think of Jesus washing feet, right? Like just
Right.
that getting right down,
Mhm.
getting to touch the
Yes.
people
Yes.
in the most.
Even asking clarifying questions, right?
Yes.
What is it that you want me to do for you?
Mhm.
Do you want to be healed? There's no assumption there.
No, and you need to say it.
Well, we have 3 and 4. I like number 4, this nice little game where the words themselves aren't offensive. It's in a look or a tone, and then you can go, what? And just play those two back and forth like a fiddle, right? Okay, chapter 4. Focus our prayer on feelings, or focus his prayer on feelings. And we get a little bit more of the dynamics of hell, right? So the amateur suggestions in your last letter warn me that it is high time for me to write to you fully on the painful subject of prayer. You might have spared the comment that my advice about his prayers for his mother proved singularly unfortunate. That is not the sort of thing that a nephew should write to his uncle, nor a junior tempter to the undersecretary of a department. It also reveals an unpleasant desire to shift responsibility. You must learn to pay for your own blunders. So we kind of get a sense of the other half of the conversation, hey?
Yeah.
So what's the advice in this chapter?
Keep them from praying.
Yeah. Top goal, no prayer at all.
Just avoid it, yeah.
And the way to do that is, well, you named it earlier, Ben, the parrot-like nature of prayers in childhood. So children learn at their parents' knee, or at least they did once upon a time, how to pray. And so, the idea is here is that this person has come back to faith, right? Probably raised in the faith, has left it, has come back to it, is taking it seriously, and now is trying to remember how to get into this life. How do I pray? He remembers these old prayers. And so the strategy is to have him react against those old prayers, right? They were too formed, they were too given. And so really we want to aim at something spontaneous, inward, informal, unregularized. What this will actually mean to a beginner will be an effort to produce in himself vaguely devotional mood. This is a rhetorical question, so don't answer too quickly, but have you ever had that where you've prayed trying to establish a feeling in yourself? Like maybe you haven't prayed until you feel the warm and fuzzies, or until you feel sad, or until you feel wretched. That is us attempting to produce within ourselves a mood, which of course, real concentration of will and intelligence has no part in. And that might be hard for us to hear because Lewis is an Anglican, has a prayer book. So he's learned how to pray because he's praying with the church. The daily office is what the church has been doing for hundreds, if not over 1,000 years together. And these are institutional words, but they are also the words that have been handed on to us that say these are effectual. When you confess sin, you can say these words because this is the structure. And then you can be attentive to the prayer, not the feeling that's being produced. So there is a kind of prayer that the devil wants. Now, that isn't to say that we always have to use a prayer book to pray, but we do need to be aware that we can make prayer about ourselves and not actually about prayer. And so it takes some experience and trust. But if that fails, then misdirection of intention. What's he talking about there? I'm trying not to do all the talkings.
Well, just before that, he talked about in reality, our best work is done by keeping things out,
Right.
right? So when we're in prayer and we're focusing on God and on Christ himself, these guys are defeated.
Mhm. So what are some of the things that the enemy is trying to keep out?
Actually focused on God versus ourselves in prayer.
Mhm. So things like when we are faithful to confess our sin, he is faithful to forgive us and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Right. So again, the devil wants to keep those sorts of thoughts away from us, because we might just then pray seriously.
Mhm.
There's also this sense of our bodies, right? We are embodied beings. And so the way we posture our bodies have an effect, but also the tiredness, right? So when they say they are praying for forgiveness, let them be trying to feel forgiven. Teach them to estimate the value of each prayer by their success in producing the desired feeling, and never let them suspect how much success or failure of that kind depends on whether they are well or ill, fresh or tired at the moment.
Doesn't put the hope on the promises of Christ,
Right.
right? It's all based on our feelings. Do I
Right.
feel charitable after I pray? Do I feel forgiven? Do I feel brave?
Yes.
Well, we talked about that before. Bravery
Mhm.
can't be a feeling. It's
Right.
trusting and going.
Yes. And then there's this recognition that the enemy is not idle. So we have this ghastly luminosity, that stabbing and searing glare, which makes the background of permanent pain to the devil's life. You won't find that presence at the back of the patient's mind. You will find a composite object, different ridiculous ingredients, pictures of the enemy as he appeared during the discreditable episode known as the Incarnation. So we'll be imagining Jesus in our minds. Images of God, whatever that might look like, the Father and the Spirit. Some reverence. And then God is also located, maybe up into the left corner of the bedroom ceiling, or inside the head, or on the crucifix on the wall. And so another tool of misdirection is to begin to address the prayers to those things, those idols, not to the person who made him. And so the temptation then becomes to keep adding to importance to that object, to approve it, so that more and more prayer life is being directed to an idol and not the living God. And so Lewis recommends this prayer to not to what I think thou art, but to what thou knowest thyself to be. Only God knows God. So ultimately, at some point, our prayer must go to the one who knows himself.
I like the last couple lines. It kind of reinforces the power of prayer
Mhm.
in avoiding the situation, this real nakedness of the soul in prayer. You'll be helped by the fact that the humans themselves do not desire it as much as they suppose. There's such a thing as getting more than they are ordered.
Right. So what do you hear in those sentences?
Yeah, I think just getting more. than what we think is even
Mhm.
possible. There's such power in it.
Yes.
I guess that's what I.
So there's a recognition that part of us, at the very least, does not actually want God to show up.
Yeah.
That would be awesome in its ancient sense of terribleness almost. Because again, we may get more than what we bargained for there. God shows up. We are laid bare. So there's some sense of fear, but there's also hopefulness, as you say. Yeah.
But yeah, it's that unknown, right?
Mhm.
It's that desert of not knowing
Mhm.
what God will do in our lives
Yes.
in response to what we're asking. But the power is in that there's healing, there's hope, but we don't know what it is that will be required. I think
Yes.
sometimes we just want the covering,
Right.
the manna for the moment,
Mhm.
not what was the deep heart
Yes.
change needed, or
Yes.
whichever,
Yes.
which then creates nakedness.
Yes. And which again is truly is a desire for God's presence, right? Because that's where transformation comes from. That's the source. It's our desire to have God more than our desire to have our sin.
I was just thinking over the years, I've been to many of these big gatherings, charismatic gatherings. There's people jumping up and down and waving things for many times I thought, what am I missing? What's going on? I'm not getting this, and I felt very uncomfortable. But it seemed to be, as time went on, I realized that everyone's connecting sort of in a different way. And because they're jumping up and down and waving and flagging and all these things doesn't mean I have to do that. But for a long time, I felt very uncomfortable in those
Mhm.
gatherings.
Yes, I can empathize with that.
And, I think of our own church when we gather, different ones will do different things. And I'm sure that same uncomfortableness is probably present.
Yes.
So I don't know what the answer is to that. But
If you're ever wanting to go deeper in that, Jonathan Edwards, I have a copy of the book, Bob, that you can borrow. It's edited by James Houston, who was at Regent, I believe, and it's an abridged version of Jonathan Edwards' Religious Affections. And it's basically, Jonathan Edwards was a contemporary of Wesley's. He was an American or in the States. He was the kind of the last Puritan, and he oversaw a revival in the States. And much of what you describe, much of what was seen at places like the Vineyard, the Toronto Blessing, that kind of stuff would happen. And in those days, Wesley himself was considered too much of an enthusiast. So that was gross enthusiasm, was very critical by the high church as not being, rational, is too emotive. So Religious Affections is Jonathan Edward pastorally working through the revival that he's a part of, where all sorts of things are happening. People are barking, they're making animal noises, they're falling down, they're twitching, they're laughing, they're doing all kinds of stuff that you probably experienced that you're talking about. And so he begins to sort through it. And basically, he comes to the point where he says, not everything in this revival is of the Spirit, but not everything in this revival is of the devil either. And it's his methodology of how do we work through and begin to distinguish between the real movement of the Holy Spirit without quashing everything. Because that's the temptation, right? It's just, oh, you can't do that. You have to sit up straight and be quiet and listen and all this kind of, no, we don't want to squash the work of the Spirit. The Spirit is doing new things. We want to foster that. And at the same time, we don't want to swallow the whale whole. We need to be discerning of the spirits. So might be an interesting read for you. So chapter 5, war is not a guarantee to help with damnation. The big question is, what is the patient's reaction to the war? So, did you like that Wormwood got drunk? So notice the wine of hell is the anguish and bewilderment of the human soul. So there are terror pictures of the future. There are self-pitying glances to the happy past. Thrills in the pit of the stomach. There's still duty in the midst of this feast. And once again, Satan does not lose his head, right? This is an opportunity because God wants free sons and daughters. There is always opportunity on both sides for salvation or damnation. So the real business is to undermine faith and prevent the formation of virtue. So why is Screwtape not big on wars? Why does he see them as not as good a tool as some of his contemporaries?
Well, I think part of it is where he talks about during that time of tribulation, they might turn to God.
Right. And why might that happen? What is it about war that might cause people to turn to God?
Because they witnessed the suffering and the cruelty.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
It's kind of hard to delude yourself that you're going to live forever in wartime.
Yeah.
Right. So there's that things that have maybe been put off, things that were hazy, now are starting to obtain some clarity through this life situation, through this context. And we see thousands turning in this tribulation to the enemy, while tens of thousands who do not go so far as that will nevertheless have their attention diverted from themselves to values and causes which they believe to be higher than the self. So what has Screwtape's refrain been so far, right? It's keep him looking inward. Keep things hazy. Suddenly here life takes on a clarity and people start to look at something higher outside of themselves. And it's a cause, right? The enemy disapproves of many causes, but here he's unfair because these humans who have given their lives for causes he thinks are bad, he also seems to give them points because They were following the best they knew. So here in wartime, we got people being killed by going to places where they know that they might be killed. And they go there anyways. That's virtue. And so for Screwtape, rather than war, it's the nursing home
Mhm.
that is the ideal place for people to die. Amid the doctors who'd lie, nurses who'd lie, friends who'd lie, promising life to the dying, encouraging the belief that sickness excuses every indulgence. And even a priest is denied at the end in order to delude the sick person about their true condition. That Stanley Hauerwas, theologian that I've talked about from time to time, talks about medicine, and he likes little pithy sayings. And one of the things he says is we basically pay doctors to lie to us, to not let us know that we're dying until it's too late.
Mhm.
Tell us that we're well and that you can keep us well. Even if it's not true, keep telling us that. It's one of the reasons why the cemetery used to be attached to the church building, right? So you would come to church every Sunday, you would have to go through the saints in the graveyard. And you were confronted by the reality that you too would one day be there. But in our modern context, we put the cemeteries on the edge of town. So unless you're going to Costco or Landmark Theater, you don't have to go past it, right? You don't have to be reminded. And even then, you could get away with doing 80 there and you don't really have to look. It's away from the road. It's kind of hidden with trees, right? We don't want to be confronted with death. We want to keep things hazy. We want to believe that we are going to live forever.
I can see the lights of the mausoleum from my house.
Oh, you're fine then. And besides, the way that Karen threatens you, you know that you could die any day. She keeps you grounded.
Even our food systems and stuff have really been built to,
Right. Talk about that.
I think, just to avoid that reality of, very few people have butchered a live animal,
Right.
and most of it comes neatly wrapped and separated, cleaned.
Right. To the point that a lot of our children do not associate the food that they're eating with the McDonald's farm.
Yeah.
Oh, the cow in the barn goes moo. The cow in the barn goes moo. And then the farmer hits him on the head, and that's how we get hamburger.
That's all she's good for. She's out the barn.
All right. We're now at 8:01. We have time still. But we're just about to start talking about chapter 6, and we've read up to 17. So if there are things that you want to talk about, you don't have to just chronologically work through this. We can jump. So if there was something that really stood out to you and you thought, oh, I want to talk about that, I want to have some conversation, have at her. Don't feel like we gotta miss half the book or miss something that you thought was really important or significant.
I don't remember exactly what chapter it's in, but there's, it's almost like he's talking, and I think this, we read some of this in Mere Christianity as well, and some of the other books we've been reading about it. The sense I got was fake it till you make it.
Okay. Yes. So that might have actually been in the second last chapter. Again, talking about because we're embodied, our souls, our spirits are impacted by our bodies. And so when we kneel to pray, that has an impact on our spirit. And so it's kind of like, if you want to love somebody, then what the best thing you can do is not just pray about loving that person, although that's a good thing to do, or wishing that it would happen, or trying to get to know them better. It is to actively love them. Do the action of love, treat them well, be kind to them, speak highly of them, that sort of thing. And you, in the action of loving and choosing to loving, you will come to experience the feeling and have the disposition of love. So it's the same sort of thing. If we do what we know cognitively to be right and we are called to do, then we will not only be doing those things, which again, that is an act of the will. That's what's supposed to be happening anyways. But we will come to love it. In Anne of Green Gables, Lucy Maud Montgomery talks about Anne faced her duty and did it. And as ever happens when somebody does that, she found that duty to be a friend. Have I said enough on that?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's just been a recurring theme for me lately, and I've actually been reading the Amplified Bible version on my
Yeah.
the Bible in a year readings,
Yeah.
and every time the word love, it translates it to, having that other person's best interests at heart
Right.
and doing things that will benefit them. That's what the word means,
Yes. Yeah.
and it
That's
keeps
a
hitting
warm,
me over
fuzzy
and over
mood.
the head,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
which is good because I need to be hit over the head.
You're not alone, sister. Good. Other things people noticed or want to talk about? I don't mind keep going in order. I mean, that doesn't bother me. I just don't want to lose an opportunity of, like, oh, we're never going to get to chapter 10. And that was the one that I really wanted to talk about.
Well, the other thing I noticed, and I guess it's similar, is kind of in chapter 13 where it talks about let him do anything but act, and you kind of referred to that earlier. So he'd gone away and now he's come back, but keep it all kind of fuzzy still.
Right. Okay.
And that
conversion.
active habits are strengthened by repetition.
Right.
So again, it's that theme for me is that it's doing something,
Yes. Yes.
not just the feelings. And I know you and I, Dave, have talked about it, how at one point in my Christian life, I very much felt joy, peace, whatever, all sorts of things. And now I would say I feel nothing, but I am totally relying on the promises of God. And he said he'll never let me go. So that must be the case.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I just keep trying to move forward.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. So I think this is where Screwtape says, I would make it a rule to eradicate from my patient any strong personal taste which is not actually a sin, even if it is something quite trivial, such as a fondness for country cricket or collecting stamps or drinking cocoa. Such things, I grant you, have nothing of virtue in them, but there is a sort of innocence and humility and self-forgetfulness about them which I distrust. So Lewis was very much into pleasure, that pleasures are good and can be at least the stepping stone in a person's transformation. The man who truly and disinterestedly enjoys any one thing in the world for its own sake and without caring 2 pence what other people say about it, is by that very fact forearmed against some of our subtlest modes of attack. You should always try to make the patient abandon the people or food or books he really likes in favor of the best people, the right food, the important books. I have known a human defended from strong temptations to social ambition by a still stronger taste for tripe and onions.
Mhm.
You know, the scripture that I thought of right away was in 1 Corinthians 10, 23, 24. Everything is permissible, but not everything is constructive. Everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. Nobody should seek the good of their own good, but the good of others. So that's something, Mary, you were saying, what that keeps going over and over and over. Well, it's very true. If you're focused on yourself and your own goodness, it's wrong. You should be focusing on the good of others. How can I serve others? How can I help them? So that's been a walking stick for me, probably for my whole Christian life, has been everything is permissible. Everything's, but no, it isn't. It's not going to help.
Yeah. Yeah, so again, keeping piety in the imaginations and in the affections and out of the will is the devil's goal, right? Make them feel things, make them think things, but don't let them do things. And for Lewis, he sees something very redeeming in actual simple things: reading a good book, taking a walk, smoking a pipe, drinking a beer. And I know I'm in an evangelical context here, so drinking, smoking, and dancing, what? But I think, we'll see it in Great Divorce as well, that some of these things can actually be a starting point, can be an ember that can be fanned into flame, right? So the devil wants to keep us away from those simple, plain things. Reminds me of Victor Shepard, who was a professor at seminary and he pastor of more than 40 years. And he would say, if somebody comes to you and they are wrestling and they have been wrestling and with this besetting sin for so long, don't talk to them about it. Don't even pray with them about it. Take them to a baseball game. Distraction has great benefit to the spiritual condition, because even prayer and conversation is that continuing to look at the thing itself, right? It's part of the problem. We got to look beyond ourselves, away from ourselves is ultimately the key. And that's why Screwtape keeps on saying, just keep them there, and make it all imagination. That's no problem. A person can dream and fantasize about a different life and world all they want. No problem.
Interesting. And beer would be a good, one of the clearest examples, but not the only one. I've seen it used like to drown, avoid. You
Right.
can watch people go and you're like, oof.
And he does talk about some alcoholism.
And then the very opposite, I've seen and
Yep.
experienced people enjoy it out of gratitude beyond themselves, those things, and create a different spirit and a different
Yes.
moment out of the very same
Yes.
activity.
Yeah. And so there is a different approach there, right? So he does talk about if we can use alcohol as sort of self-medication, that's great. It has destructive force. But there is pleasure in the thing itself too, right? So if we can just enjoy the thing as a pleasure without it becoming gluttonous or intemperate, right? So it's the extremes that are risky. And remember, Satan always attacks us in pairs. There's always two ditches to everything, right? So even the chapter that I really like the best is the one on gluttony. So chapter 17, gluttony of delicacy, not of excess. And so he talks about the mother in that case, where she's just a nightmare to servants because nothing that's brought to her is ever good enough for her. So she's a pain in everyone's butt, right? This tea is too strong. I just need one good cup of, weak tea. Oh, that's too much food. Take it back and instead make me this. Oh, they just won't make my toast toasty enough. And because she thinks it's the small stuff, right? I'm not asking for more. I can't be a glutton. But it's actuality, this need to have everything my way and never to be satisfied. That is a form of gluttony. And gluttony and unchastity are related to each other too, right? So that can actually be a channel. So in the same way that the virtues can channel God's grace, the vices can channel Satan's life in us as well. So I always find that, I always loved that chapter, and I came to it and just remembered how much I loved it, because I think that the world that we live in forgets that Satan attacks in pairs, that there's two ditches, right? So when we think about gluttony, overeating is a problem. In our culture, overeating is a problem, but so is this kind of thing. And so right now, maybe this kind of daintiness isn't a general problem, but it's probably true for somebody out there. Just want a little bit. Oh, no, that's too much. Take it back. Rather than receiving the hospitality, shrieking at the amount of food.
Health or the perfect diet could become the idol of that.
Right.
Is
And
that
he even addresses some of the body stuff too, right? Of the cult of body that we have today. Everybody has to look like a supermodel, magazine cover. I got to work out. I got to get thinner. I got to get rounder. I got to get pumped. I got to get buff. I got to get teeth whitened, hair straightened. I mean, everybody looks like they could be on TV.
Mhm.
I also, since nobody else is saying stuff, I'm going to say stuff. I also really like the chapter 15. The conversation about the past is frozen, so we can't live there. The future doesn't really exist. It's the present that touches eternity, because in the present is whatever is. So even if it's suffering, this creature can look at, being called up to military service as suffering that is his cross to bear. The temptation is to look at the things that they fear and to think of those things as the cross, but it's not. It's actually just doing one's duty, receiving this moment as God's will for the person and saying, thy will be done, and just receiving that present simply. Enemy wants men to think of the future too, just so much as is necessary for now planning the acts of justice or charity, which will probably be their duty tomorrow. The duty of planning the morrow's work is today's duty. So the future is the least like eternity. I think that is a real important way to think, because I do think we think an awful lot about the future to a distracting level.
Mhm.
And it's similar to wanting the virtues to be pushed out into the fantasy life, right? Into the imagination. The future is imagination. It's all speculation, right? Our fear of the future is just a speculation of what could happen. Our hope for the future is our desire for what we want to happen. But if we are a creature that is discipled to say, give me this day my daily bread, then I would receive in the present from God. And I trust the future to him. So again, we're echoing Jesus here. Don't worry about what tomorrow brings. Tomorrow has enough worry in itself for itself. But you preach the kingdom of God. You don't worry about today because the Father is going to give you the good gifts of food and drink and clothes, and he's going to take care of you.
It seems to be a posture that's very comfortable for people today, to be worrying about the future. It's a way of
Right.
controlling something
Right.
and not being present and enjoying the walk or the smoke or the, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
yeah,
just being with someone over coffee and just being present.
yeah. Yes.
But I think that it's become such a, like, I think about kids in school. Anxiety seems to be the thing. Everybody is anxious because
Yes.
they're all concerning and consumed by what people think or what the future holds. And yeah, I thought it was, I think it was chapter 6. I wrote down that he said, fear is a state of mind, moving our thoughts from God, but instead about God.
Mhm.
So rather than
Yes.
just sitting with him in the present, just thinking about him.
Yes. Yes.
But instead of accepting the daily bread, the plan that he has, that's a good plan.
Yep.
And yeah, just not trusting God.
Yes. Yeah. Which is what sin is, right? It's the conviction that God can't be trusted. And so I need to do something different for myself, to establish myself, to protect myself. Go ahead, Bob.
Just like I'm reflecting on what Tina just said, our whole economy, the whole focus of the world, it's on the environment, global warming, it's just on and on, inflation, debt. There's just all doom and gloom, and if that's the future, if that's what, certainly that's what Satan wants us to be focused on, is there's no hope, like we don't have the answer, but we think we have the answer. And it does raise up a whole generation of people that are living in fear, not living in trust, not living in the hope that God has this in his hand.
Yeah.
And so, that's resounding over and over and over again on everything that we hear. And so we have to push back against that. Doesn't mean we have to close our eyes to it. We know that's the reality, but we also have to push back to say who is the one who's the overseer of this all.
There's a really good book on that topic called Following Jesus in a Culture of Fear, I think is the title. Author's first name is Andrew. I'm not remembering his last name. And it was written post 9/11. But a really good book at a time when people were feeling like they couldn't trust their neighbors. It wasn't safe to kind of connect and interact because you didn't know who was a sleeper cell, that kind of stuff, right? So again, a good resource. Chapter 14, I thought was important too. Have you pointed out to your patient just how humble he's being? So that's something Martin Luther talked a lot about, vainglorious pride, right? That moment when pride comes in and you realize, oh, I'm doing a great job. And then you're just like, oh no. There it is. I just screwed it up. And so there is this, again, this earthiness, right? Because he talks about what true humility is. And true humility isn't saying when I'm clever, I'm really stupid. When I'm a good person, I'm really a bad person. That's what a lot of times we hear, and a lot of times we've heard it from pulpits. True humility is having a right estimation of ourselves. This is the way Paul describes it in Romans. Having a right estimation of ourselves. So we know who we are, standing ourselves up to our full height, and then looking to God and seeing how much greater he is. That is the basis for humility, not writhing around on the ground saying, oh, I'm just a filthy worm kind of thing. And it's that kind of humility, real humility, that then can't be corrupted. Because as soon as the enemy begins to say, oh, look how humble you're being, you can say, I know I'm not humble enough. I know who I am, right? I know who God is.
You represent Christ well.
Sorry?
You represent Christ well.
Oh, thanks. I'm just talking right now.
That's a form of humility is everything that we're doing, we're Christ's representative. Christ lives in us.
Right.
And when we keep that in our mind, that keeps you humble then.
Yep. Well, and looking outwards, right? I think he talks about looking outward to self-forgetfulness. Yeah. But it also means having a right estimation of others. No doubt they are, in fact, less valuable than he believes. That is not the point. The great thing is to make him value an opinion for some quality other than truth, thus introducing an element of dishonesty and make-believe into the heart of what otherwise threatens to become a virtue.
You unpack that?
Well, I can give it a shot. So let's start from the beginning of that paragraph. You must therefore conceal from the patient the true end of humility. Let him think of it not as self-forgetfulness. So that's the true end of humility, is self-forgetfulness. So you're not thinking about yourself anymore. But as a certain kind of opinion, namely a low opinion of his own talents and character. So true humility is self-forgetfulness. False humility is an opinion about our own talent and character. So some talents, I gather he really has, fix in his mind the idea that humility consists in trying to believe those talents to be less valuable than he believes them to be. So if you have a quick mind, you then try and convince yourself, because you want to be humble, that your mind is not as quick as it actually is. No doubt, they are in fact less valuable than he believes. So your quick mind is less valuable than probably you give it weight to. But that's not really the point. That's this. The great thing is to make him value an opinion. So the opinion that I'm not as smart as I am, for some quality other than truth. So you're not telling the truth about yourself. You've actually inserted the lie for the truth. I'm not as smart as I am. And by buying into that lie, that is what I mean by being humble. So humbleness is a lie in that case, thus introducing an element of dishonesty, it's a lie, and make-believe. I'm pretending something I know isn't true to be true. I'm pretending something is true that I know isn't true. So that's dishonesty, that's make-believe of the heart, what otherwise threatens to become a virtue. So humility is a virtue. So true humility is a virtue, not false humility. And so humility itself would be a virtue unless Satan can corrupt it into a false humility, in which case it becomes a vice. It's a dishonesty and it's a make-believe. All the while you think you're being virtuous.
And you're still focused on yourself.
You're still focused on yourself. Yeah, because you have to maintain that lie. You have to maintain the idea, oh, I'm not really that smart. I'm not that good.
The next sentence is the good example. Just read the next sentence.
By this method, thousands of humans have been brought to think that humility means pretty women trying to believe they are ugly, clever men trying to believe they are fools. And since what they are trying to believe may in some cases be manifest nonsense, they cannot succeed in believing it, and we have the chance of keeping their minds endlessly revolving on themselves in an effort to achieve the impossible, to believe the lie.
We actually practice and teach taking compliments at work.
Right.
I think it's that
Yeah.
false humility
Yeah.
piece, because then it cheapens the other person's, it cheapens the whole interaction too.
Right. Yes. That's good.
Thank you for how you, oh, it was nothing or whatever. Well, that cheapened it for everybody's.
You guys
And took away.
haven't experienced it yet, but we've done it at different times and we'll do it at times again, what we call a love feast, where we bless each other. So everybody's given a little loaf of bread. You go and connect with people. It doesn't have to be everybody, but some people. You offer them some of your bread and you bless them. You tell them, you bless them. What is good about them, something positive, not you would be better if, but you know, Natasha, I really appreciate your tender heart, particularly for including children in the life of our entire life together as a people. You know, that's a blessing. And it's a practice to receive that. And that bread becomes an association. That's a Wesleyan love feast. And then she would have the opportunity, though by no means would she reciprocate. She could do it later. She could, you know, it's also a place where things might get resolved, but it's an important practice. Our ability to bless each other, to speak things that are true about each other. You know, and again, two ditches, right? So there's the false humility, and then there is also conceit, even false conceit. So it's 8:31, my friends. Did anybody have anything that they just had to get out before we pray and shut off the recording?